Jared Halpern. Still no word on the condition of Fox News correspondent Benjamin Hall. He was wounded while covering the invasion in Kiev and is hospitalized. President Biden taking time Monday to speak to a Washington fundraising event for the Democratic National Committee. The president spoke mostly about climate change and again blamed Russia's President Vladimir Putin for high crude oil and gas prices. America is listening to Fox News.
Back at it again with the Lenten season menu with Mezcla, giving you a variety of food you can enjoy and pick from, like the fish tacos, spicy buttered shrimp, parrotfish escabeche, lobster pad capral pasta, crab-crusted Chilean sea bass, and more. There you have options. Offered at Hagåtña location for lunch and dinner only at Mezcla. For reservations, call 671-479-2652. What are you waiting for? Let's go celebrate the Lenten season with Mezcla.
Another state about to ban abortion in the first trimester.
Idaho's House joined its Senate in approving a bill aimed at banning abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy. It's similar to a Texas measure and allows the father, grandparents, siblings, aunts, and uncles to sue an abortion provider for a minimum of $20,000 in damages. Opponents of the Idaho legislation said it's unconstitutional. Republican Representative Stephen Harris sponsored the bill, saying it's meant to prevent the destruction of innocent human life. Jill Nato, Fox News.
Ohio joins the list of states no longer requiring a permit to carry a concealed weapon. Governor Mike DeWine signing the bill passed earlier by state lawmakers. It allows any adult in Ohio who's not barred from carrying a gun to do so without a permit or special training. Controversial race curricula is being banned in a southern state.
Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves has signed a law banning critical race theory or CRT-linked lessons in the classroom. The Republican rejects accusations that he's trying to whitewash history.
Both the good and the bad should be taught in our schools. Period.
Critical race theory is an academic framework that alleges racism is largely built into most aspects of American policies and laws. Opponents of banning those teachings argue it's largely a college-level course and not even taught in K-12 schools. Supporters of the ban say CRT-linked lessons are being taught to children and dividing classrooms based on race. Tom Graham, Fox News.
The third day of testimony was postponed Monday in the trial of 4 men accused of plotting to kidnap Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer after what the judge called an essential participant in the trial tested positive for COVID-19 over the weekend. He didn't say who it is, but the judge said he hopes to resume the trial on Thursday. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Half a day. This is Jade Uggan from Security Title, and in celebration of Tomorrow Month, here is a tip on dealing with your land. You might be thinking of giving part of your property to your child or another family member. Once you have subdivided the property and recorded the map, you will also need to record the deed transferring the title. Just drawing the map is not enough to make sure they actually own the land. Protehi I Tanonmu. When it comes to your family land, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
We're already Pika's best radio station, but we're always looking for ways to be even better. Announcing the point on Alexa. In addition to our FM and HD radio feeds, our incredible app, informative website, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live, you can now tell Alexa to stream The Point. And your smart speaker will start playing whatever we're saying. News and views 24/7 with your 4-word command. Alexa, stream The Point.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
A homeowner's policy protects much more than just your house. It also protects you against claims from someone being hurt on your property. If a visitor is injured at your place, how much are you covered for? The smart thing to do is get the answer today.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's a good way to start a show on a Tuesday afternoon. We still got a lot of time left this week, so Jose and I are grinning from ear to ear as we got 4 whole days of Tall Tales to go. Okay, let's dive right into it with Zemi Ikotny. I gotta borrow your hard copy again, Jose. Yeah, I forgot to bring my printout with me. Thank you, sir. Yeah, here we go. 2 long years. Guam needs to heal from pandemic wounds. 2 years ago today, the governor announced that the first 3 COVID-19 cases had been confirmed on Guam. The announcement that day turned our world upside down. Government agencies and businesses closed and travel restrictions were implemented. A week after the first cases were announced, the governor gave us the sad news of the first death. Then daily case counts and car scores and surges with the frequent announcement of deaths. We had quarantine requirements for travelers and closure of all but essential businesses and roads. Yeah, not quite. For a while, we even had roadblocks on our major streets for no reason at all. And barriers were placed in front of our parks and beaches. With every cough and sneeze, we worried about our loved ones, but we also worried about our civil liberties. Schools were closed and different models of learnings were used. We had grab-and-go meals, grab-and-go commencements, grad-and-go commencements, and grab-and-learn class assignments. Eventually, we had Wuhan virus tests, vaccines, and boosters. We all learned more than we ever cared to know about masks, sanitizing, and our social distancing. And thousands of us filed their first unemployment claims. It's been a rough 2 years. Now we're starting to emerge from the pandemic with no restrictions on outdoor gatherings and indoor gatherings of up to 100 people allowed. Proof of vaccination is no longer required to go to dinner or work out at the gym. The Omicron wave is fading, with more than 135,000 residents vaccinated and more than 46,000 cases of Wuhan virus reported. We are more than ready to be rid of this disease. The handling of the pandemic has been divisive here, as it has in all communities around our country. As our healthcare system and economy heal from damage over the pandemic, our community needs to heal as well. In the debate between civil liberties and public safety, between our financial well-being and the containment of virus, it was easy to focus on those divisions. While we may not have agreed on the rules surrounding restrictions and precautions, we all wanted the same thing: to minimize the harm that was coming to us from every direction. Over 2 long years, the pandemic has hurt us in many ways. We have a lot of healing and rebuilding ahead. Let's just not talk about rebuild back better. It's the last thing we need. All right, so much for the editorials. Kind of a feel-good editorial, as are most of them these days. Let's take a peek at the card and see what we've got here. Of course, I start out with Paul Zerzan and systemic racism. Public Law 36-34 to see what the Guam Visitors Bureau did today. Not much suspense in 36-34. I've got Brian Tetlahi versus Ifinu Tsumoru. I've got Berg versus Transparency. Pete versus Imandagi Sia. Pete versus Imandagi Sia. Did I repeat? Yeah. Rules Committee versus, and if you could see my copy of the card, it's a question mark. There's an enigma. Yeah, there is an enigma in the card. Yoon Sik Yul versus Ho S. Yoon. You'll remember that Ho S. Yoon is the owner of the Guam Daily Post, the newspaper that used to run really sharp editorials, but has now run one in over a month. We've got a Kansas teacher versus they, Japan versus capitalism, and Waukesha versus Minneapolis. The last item on the card was the first rule of the gag order. You remember the first rule of the gag order, Jose?
We don't talk about the gag order.
That's right. Well, we talked about it yesterday in defiance of the gag order.
Mm-hmm.
All right, systemic racism. Yesterday I wore my red shirt, as is my usual custom, paying homage to red rice here, which I have a picture up and I'm holding up. Don't even think about talking about the red rice as any color but red, especially orange. Okay, then we come to the Public Law 36-34 section of the meeting, and guess who didn't do it right this time? If you guess the Guam Visitors Bureau, you're not even a very good guesser. That's like saying, guess how many pennies make up $1? Would that be 100? Good guess, yeah. So they've got the call to order, approval of previous meeting minutes, etc., market updates. And then over here at item number 7, new business, period. Suggesting to anyone who reads this that they'll decide what the new business is when the meeting is called to order and decide what they're going to do. And, of course, I can tell them exactly what they're going to do. They're going to violate the open government law, and everything else they've done is void.
That should be in the agenda.
Yeah, right. Violation of open government law. They might as well, yeah. There were, let's see, 6 notices in today's paper. And 6 notices, no, wait a minute, 6 notices on one page. 6 notices on page, I don't have the page number here, one page of the Post. And, you know, these, I'm really glad that Senator Brown introduced 36-34 because these notices of meetings themselves are quite interesting, even if you don't go to the meeting. As an example, the Chamorro Land Trust Commission is meeting on Thursday, and this is one of the things they're going to discuss. Null and void leases update. Now, by way of a little bit of background, you'll know that the Chamorro Land Trust started. Well, it actually started in 1975. The statute was enacted in 1975. Nothing happened for almost 20 years when Angel Santos became an extremely active and caused Mike Phillips to file suit to writ a mandate ordering the governor of Guam to appoint members to the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, which the governor did. And Santos camped out in the front lawn of Guadalupe for a couple of weeks. It was a real interesting media event. But in any case, the Chamorro Land Trust Commission finally kicked off. In 1995, we had several thousand people lining up to sign up for leases in the Chamorro Land Trust property. The poor guys, because all of that time spent in line was wasted time, because we have done away with that method of choosing lessees. You now have to be able to prove that you owned or farmed land that was taken by the United States in eminent domain before 1968 to be eligible for a lease. And anyhow, before the settlement was made, there were several outstanding leases, and there were a lot of people in line. So some people in line took it upon themselves to trade places. So someone at the back of the line might have a friend, a cousin, a relative, whatever, at the front of the line. They'd trade places. This happened with some regularity. And one of the things that caused us to notice this was somebody from the Department of Public Works opened up a new road up the side of Mount Barragata to some extremely valuable Chamorro Land Trust leases that were inhabited by some as you were leased to some extremely important people, like Senator Raging Biscoe Lee, as an example.
A sitting senator.
A sitting senator. And it caused an awful lot of attention to be directed to this, whereupon the Attorney General ruled you can't trade places in that line. So anyone who got a lease because he traded places, any people who traded places in the line got leases, found that their leases were void because there's no provision that allowed for trading places in that line. Now, void means it didn't happen. So as a point of law here, Jose, let's hear some Law and Order music. You cannot ratify a void act. A void is something that's void is like it didn't happen. So there was a great a bit of consternation at the commission. What about these poor people that got these leases through no fault of their own because they swapped places in line? And sometimes they were encouraged by employees of the commission to do that. Well, that fell apart when Pika Fairharan conducted an investigation or caused an investigation of all of this stuff, came back and reported no discipline because nobody did anything wrong. So there was a lot of virtue signaling. Well, we got to do something to help these people with these void leases, et cetera. And the matter kind of disappeared from the news cycle, along with Jack Haddock III, who was the executive director who was asked to resign. A lot of interesting stories here at the Chamorro Land Trust. I think they did something right. When was it? I think they did something right in 1989, but I've got to go back and check my notes.
I bet everyone was waiting for you to say 1972.
That's Robert Underwood.
Okay.
The year that
Everything started.
The year that was 1972. So they may have done something right along the way, but I'm certainly not aware of what it would be. So now on their agenda, they've got null invoices leases update. Item A, SOP, adjudication for the null and voids. Does this mean they're going to try another silly resurrection of these leases that the chief legal officer of the island of Guam have told them are void? If they don't, I would be surprised, given their track record. That would be, that would not be playing against type for them. That's exactly their approach to their duties. When we had, you'll recall that we had Jack Haddock participate in something that, to me, in my opinion, was at least borderline forgery. When he took a report done by a land agent, added to it, and then presented it to the commission as though it was the land agent's work.
He was channeling his inner Biden.
Exactly. Then the land agent came forward and accused Haddock of threatening her, coercing her. And then Haddock came clean and said, no, I just added that language myself. So he was trying to fababa the commission. And what happened because of that? Well, after about a month, they said, well, maybe you're not quite the right guy for the job. Now they have an acting director at the commission whose name is Angela Camacho. Well, Angela, I wish you the best of luck. Next item on the card. We had Wokesters versus USA yesterday. That was the only item on the card that we finished. And it was sad because it showed that an awful lot of people in our country, if we were in the Ukraine situation, the best number in the whole thing was that 73% of Republicans said that they would fight to hang on to the country. An awful lot of the folks, especially the Democrats, said, no, we're bugging out. We're out of here.
That's 81 million people.
Yeah.
The Biden voters.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, next item on the card is Brian Tetlahi versus Ifinu Tsumoru. And this is an article that ran in the Daily News yesterday. Front page article, picture of Brian Tetlahi with a bulletin board behind him showing the some letters in the alphabet for the Chamorro orthography. And I will read this article and then comment on it as I go because I see a lot of things in here that just don't make any sense to me at all. Senyot Brian Jess Beji Tetlahi, teacher of Chamorro and cultural arts at John F. Kennedy High School, uses dance and cultural connections to educate his students about the Chamorro heritage. Dance and cultural connections. You know, I remember when we added Chamorro to the curriculum of the schools, and the idea was we're going to teach Chamorro in the schools. And I thought it was a good idea. I still think it's a good idea. However, teaching Chamorro doesn't mean what you do is you find somebody who's a Manamku, who's a native speaker, and say, go teach that class. Learning how to teach a language, learning what acquisition is all about is just like any other kind of teaching. You don't understand it unless you yourself have been taught. And then this is a quote from Senyot Brian Jess B.J. Tetlahi. Quote, my classes are all kinesthetic. All kinesthetic. Now, here's the big word. Here's the sesquipedal word of the day. You probably don't even know what sesquipedal means.
I don't even know how to spell it.
Sesquipedal. Sesqui means 1.5. Pedal, foot. So a sesquipedal word is a word that's 1.5 feet long. Like sesquipedal. So here we've got Senyot Brian Jess B.J. Tetlahi using the word kinesthetic. Kinesthesia refers to movement. That's what
kinetic, yeah.
Kinetic, right? Force, movement, etc. So just an interesting footnote here. There are a couple of senses in addition to the 6 senses that we think we have, which are what, sight, hearing, smell, touch,
taste.
That's 5 senses. Then there's one called proprioception. Proprioception is your ability to sense your attitude in the medium in which you are existing. Are you standing on your head or on your feet? Are you lying down? Are you turning us up? That's proprioception. Kinesthesiology gets into the sense of how your muscles and joints are moving to help you maintain balance, among other things. So it's a nice word to have in your hip pocket. You might get to use it about once every 10 years, unless you're teaching Chamorro at JFK and being interviewed, where you can say, my classes are all kinesthetic, because when we learn a language and culture at home, it's all hands-on, he said.
They're learning sign language?
So I get the feeling, that the kids are not in their desks and they're not doing substitution drills and dialogues. or different kinds of exercises that are normally used in the imparting of a language to someone who is not good with the language. So I have this already. I start out with this mental image of kids dancing around the room. But then he says it's all hands-on. So, the little baby in the crib, when the mother leans over and says, Nana, Nana, is dancing around. I think I understand what he's trying to say, but, and then he goes on to say, language is very difficult to learn, especially when you're not interested in learning. I see in the background a book laying on his desk. I think I can read the title of his book. Yogi Berra's Greatest Sayings by Yogi Berra. Yeah. It's kind of like, predicting predictions are really hard, especially when it's about the future.
Kids don't run when they don't want to run.
They don't?
No.
Oh.
Or when they're not running.
When they're not running. Yeah, language is very difficult to learn, especially when you're not interested in learning. Now, what is not difficult to learn when you're not interested? I don't know. I suppose there are some things. Growing up, Titlahi said, he was fortunate that the Chamorro language was spoken around him, but admitted that he was shy and ashamed to speak it. I never really took interest in it because I was so focused on how I wanted to be successful in life. I wanted to leave the island. I wanted to go study in the United States. But as he got older, he decided he needed to learn to speak his native language fluently, and even went as far as speaking only with his father, speaking Chamorro only with his father, to truly immerse himself in the language. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the best way to learn a language is to speak the language, because people don't understand this, but a language is sound, nothing else. Language is sound. And the most important organ that you have when it comes to learning a language is not your pachotmo, it's your talanga. Good ears make for good language learners. While he was still attending the University of Guam, Titlahi made a promise to himself that should he ever be fortunate enough to teach the Chamorro language, he would find ideal ways to get young people more interested in the language. And with that vow came Titlahi's drive to create different techniques and styles for teaching the language. Each year, as students walk into his classroom, the first thing Titlahi tells them is that by the time the school year ends, and this is the reason this is on the card today. This is what he tells his kids when they walk in the classroom the first day of school. Quote, "You will never be speaking the language fluently. That's a guarantee." Is he a little overconfident there? You will never be speaking the language fluently. That's a guarantee. However, you will have more of a sense of identity. Oh, that's important. Throw a little identity politics in there.
Is this for the whole classroom?
Yeah.
So is there a restriction to who can be in this class?
Everybody.
So whose identity is he talking about?
Every single person.
Oh.
He will have more of a sense of identity and a sense of place and respect. You ain't gonna learn Chamorro. Respect and sense of place, identity. You got that one nailed.
I see.
Yeah. And then at the end of it, not only for the Chamorro people, but for everyone. Now, imagine what a kid is thinking when he walks into the classroom and sits down especially if he doesn't speak Chamorro, right?
But I signed up for a Chamorro language class.
Yeah. And he said, and the teacher comes up and he says, "Good afternoon, students. My name is," I can't even remember his name, "Sunyat Bryant Jess B.J. Tetlahi. And you will not be speaking the language fluently. That's a guarantee." You know, I would have been tempted to say, "You will not be teaching me. That's a guarantee. I'm out of here. What are you doing here?" You know?
Imagine if your math teacher told you that.
You will not be doing math problems correctly. Of course, we know in these days of critical... Where's Robert Underwood? We know in these days of critical racism, to ask that the math work be done correctly is systemic racism. Yeah. You will not be speaking the language fluently. That's a guarantee. However, you will have more of a sense of identity and a sense of place and respect, not only for the Chamorro people, but for everyone. You know, I can just read so much into this.
There's so much of that theoretical babble that was ingrained that he probably thought this was a good thing to put out there.
Yeah.
And he's probably been applauded for it.
Exactly.
But the reason for a language class is so you can be conversational.
Exactly.
That's the only way that it's going to perpetuate.
Exactly. Yeah, but, well, if we were to employ Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, act only in such a way that you would cause everyone to act in the same way, you know, in 15 years, we'd have a lot of people who had a sense of identity, a sense of place, and respect. Nobody would speak. I'd be the last guy on the island who could speak the language if I'm still around here in 15 years.
He just gave the tools of how he ought to be teaching his class or handling the class, and how he talked about his way of learning the language.
Yeah.
By conversing.
Yeah. Was it? I wonder if he and his dad danced around, and if his dad gave him his dad said, I can guarantee. You know. All right. With his 23 years of experience in the arts, he's been doing this for 23 years. Tetlahi also adds cultural dances into his lessons. Now, what that means to me is that he took the dances that Frank Ramon invented in, I think it was 1987, by combining things that he picked up in New Zealand, Honolulu, Samoa, and Hawaii, and passed it off as Chamorro dances. He's teaching that to kids who probably think it's authentic, all in the name of...
It's modern, but it's not a historical thing.
No, it's not. It's not. Tetlahi shared the story of a student who wasn't at all interested in joining his dance class, but was attending only for a required elective credit. How, as time passed, the student became more open to the lessons, and his interest in learning more about his heritage grew. Didn't learn any language, but by God. Quote, he was like a spirit, just fulfilled him. And he came to me and said, "Sir, I'm so interested in joining dance. I never knew that it will be interested, but I just love it. It makes me proud." Tetlahi said of his student. So let's see, I guess, beginning, he said, in addition to his remark, I think they left something out here. This is what he said on the first day of class. Where in the heck is it here? Yeah, bear with me for just a second here. Did it disappear from this column? Ah, yes, here it is. I'm going to have to, now that I found it, I got to add something to it. You will not be speaking the language fluently, but you'll be dancing like Fred Astaire. That's a guarantee.
That's a quote?
That's my addition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're not going to teach you the language. That's a guarantee, but you're really going to be a good dancer when you finish this course. All right, we'll come back to Senyot, Brian, Jess, BJ, Tetlahi right after this short break here.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point. Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Attention tailgaters. It's time for you to get a new tail to gate on. It's a fact. They got a 2021 model clearance going on all kinds of your favorite Nissan models. The Rogue Sport, Kicks, Murano, Titan, and they've all got great FM radios so that you can pick up tall tails in the afternoon. 0% APR or your first 3 payments are on Nissan. Zero down Magic tailgaters. Learn more by visiting NissanGuam.com.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Okay, going on with his article here. One of Tetlahi's teaching methods is incorporating life experiences and lessons that don't just connect Chamorro students with their heritage, but also including how students of different ethnicities connect with the Chamorro culture. Quote, I referenced a lot of Asian cultures, most especially the Philippines, Japan, and Korea, because I have a lot of students from those countries that are taking the class. I try and tie in all of those countries, Tetlahi said. So we got a little geography here as well as Fino Chamorro. Tetlahi's class integrate technology such as video projects, presentations, and social media platforms like TikTok. Wait till the Attorney General hears about this. Yeah. Tetlahi has high hopes that despite others saying the Chamorro language is dying, the island's youth will keep it alive because of their hunger to bring out the Chamorro culture. You know, this Chamorro culture, you know, if you understand what that word means, as an anthropologist understands, is the absolute most important part of your culture is your language. So if you're really interested in culture, spend 99% of your time teaching Chamorro. Teaching how to speak Chamorro. The other percent of the time would be for calling roll. The rest of the time, use it to teach the Chamorro language. If you're really interested in other generations being able to speak Chamorro.
Unless you work for the Attorney General's office, then you're gagged.
Then, yeah, you can't use any language at all. That's true. So, you know, we're at almost a tipping point. There was a time, well, let's put it this way, about 60 years ago when I started here, every kid that was, quote, Chamorro, in other words, had one parent that was Chamorro, no problem. Fino Chamorro Todu. They spoke it, you know, native speakers. Now, finding a kid who could string together 3 paragraphs of standard English, That was a little bit tougher. So we've come the other way. And now, you know, the kids that graduate from high school, pretty competent in the English language. One of the things that I discovered, you know, when I first started out was that parents encouraged their kids to speak English and discouraged Chamorro. They thought that English was the key to success, so they tried to speak English at home. Well, your ability to speak any language depends on the models that you use when you're learning the language. So if you learn Spanish from someone who grew up in Barcelona, whose native tongue is Spanish, you're probably going to, if you work at it, you're going to sound like a Spaniard. If you learn Spanish from the high school Spanish teacher in Elkhorn, Wisconsin named Betty O'Brien, who I think visited Tijuana one afternoon, that was her real-life experience, you're not going to sound like someone from Spain or Mexico. So if your parents are trying to teach you English and they've got a loose grip on it themselves, it's just not going to work out very well. And that's kind of where we started almost 60 years ago. But we've gotten to the point now where if you're not in your late 40s, chances are you don't speak Chamorro. And even a lot of folks older than that, even people in their 50s and 60s nowadays who have two Chamorro parents, don't speak Chamorro. And we've relied heavily on these older folks. When we first started the Chamorro language program in the schools, that's who the teachers were. But as far as I know, we never had a program to teach people how to be Chamorro, teach people who did not speak Chamorro to be teachers of Chamorro. We never developed any Betty O'Briens here. You know, I don't think there's a single Chamorro teacher who doesn't claim Chamorro ancestry. And until we get to that point, it's going to be an uphill struggle. Okay, so he says, in order for a culture and language to survive, it needs to evolve. You see it in the clothes and the adornments that we wear, like the Sinahi, you know, nobody ever wore until about 20 years ago, that shell necklace. You see it in the tattoos that we have. Really.
And there's a little bit of controversy over tattoos in this region of the Pacific.
Because?
They don't think they're found on anything that's preserved or any bodies or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
There's discussion on that, but...
Now, if you were talking about Samoa, in Samoa, in order to have certain ranks like chief, you tattooed from about the knees up, you know, up to your shoulders. I've read about it. I've never seen it done. I've seen examples of it, but the tattooing is done with a little mallet and a sharp piece of coconut, and it must hurt like hell. And of course, that's the object. Anyone who can endure this is a certain kind of person. I don't think that's going to catch on here, even if Frank Rabone picks it up and integrates it into his routines.
And some people have adapted it and accept it as today, but to claim it's historical, it's just a really stretch.
Exactly, yeah. Because of this renaissance, it kind of drives this hunger for students to know their own identity. This all sounds like psychobabble to me. And so that's the inspiration that keeps me going when I teach the arts and teach the language. You know, if this is what we're doing for the Chamorro language in school, we're wasting a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of people's time who perhaps really do want to learn the language. Yeah, and once again, I'm really in favor. I was in favor of adapting or putting the Chamorro language in the school curriculums for a couple reasons. The obvious one, of course, and then the not so obvious one is that the learning of a language other than your mother tongue strengthens the muscles in your brain. It makes your brain function better. The brain is like any other muscle. When you exercise it and use it, it gets stronger. And I've seen research on this that, that people that learn a language other than their mother tongue have a mental capacity enhancement. So there's that. And then I think it's just good to learn as much as you can about any other language, no matter where you are or what you're doing. That's how we communicate. Now, if you were to look up a guy named Benjamin Lee Whorf, and I know you're not going to do that, who was a theoretical linguist back in I think he died in like 1955. He said that language is the shapes the eyes that you see the world through. In other words, if you are a Hopi Indian living in Arizona, you see things differently than a kid in Wisconsin, an American kid living in Wisconsin. And the analogy that I would use to explain that is that you have a brain which is like a desktop, but the desktop it's got a basic program downloaded. It was kind of downloaded before you were born, but then you have to download an operating system into that brain, and the system that you use to download is your mother tongue. So the example that I remember is that an English-speaking person, one whose mother tongue is English, sees time as linear. When are you going to go there, Bob? I think I'll leave in about 3 weeks, right? You ask a Hopi the same question, and he'll say, when the sun has risen 21 times. Cylindrical. Linear. Now, I don't know if that's correct or not. Maybe it's just something that somebody thought was neat. But that's the theory, that the language that you use shapes your thought processes. It's like the operating system in your computer. So if you could have two, you're increasing the use of your brain housing group dramatically.
Something as simple as hunger. We say, I am hungry. And some of the romantic languages, they say, I have hunger.
Yo tengo hambre. Yeah, that's true.
It seems simple, but it's a really different concept.
Exactly. Yeah, very different. Good point, Jose. Well, Senyat, what's the guy's name here? Put that article away. Senyat, Brian Jess BJ Tetlahi. Yeah, maybe you ought to ask somebody if they'll show you how to get tall tales on Facebook. You might learn something here. All right, let's take a short break.
Always here to help you. This island is our home. Through the years, we've been a friend to the neighbors we have known. Now we're banking on the future. Services to choose. Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots. Back at it again with the Lenten season menu with Mezcla, giving you a variety of food you can enjoy and pick from, like the fish tacos, spicy buttered shrimp, parrotfish escabeche, lobster pad capral pasta, crab-crusted Chilean sea bass, and more. There you have options. Offered at Hagåtña location for lunch and dinner only at Mezcla. For reservations, call 671-479-2652. What are you waiting for? Let's go celebrate the Lenten season with Mezcla.
Okay, here we are. We got about 9 more minutes to the big halftime show. Next item on the card is Berg versus Transparency. I think Berg's going to win. And the title here of this article that ran in the Post is a quote from Berg. People are allowed to make errors. The Guam Board of Medical Examiners continues to weigh the implications of complying with local laws that require physicians to disclose any history of administrative complaints or criminal misconduct. Nathaniel Berg, the board's chairman, has expressed concerns over efforts from Speaker Therese Tetlahi to push for more information to be published on the Board of Medical Examiners public database. The thing that came up in the oversight meeting was sort of bullying on the part of Speaker to get everybody's, anything they've done wrong ever, they would have gone to court, posted on the website. Is Therese Tetlahi bullying people?
It's kind of a stretch.
I just can't imagine her going down to the beach and kicking sand in somebody's face.
She does it with a soft voice.
Yeah. And then the bullying is that she wants anything that anybody has done wrong, they have gone to court, would be posted on the GBME website. Berg questioned whether disclosing information about doctors is a wise thing to do, considering the effects it would have on attracting medical professionals to move here. You know, if you want to go to Guam, you aren't going to be able to leave your sordid past behind you. I wonder if Frenchie's listening because, you know, the old story about the French Foreign Legion, the old French Foreign Legion, there were theoretically no Frenchmen in the Foreign Legion. That's why it was called the Foreign Legion. You had to be a citizen of another country. And if you were able to enlist in the Legion, no one would, that was it. There was no history before that. So for a lot of people, the Foreign Legion was a way to escape their criminal past in other countries. And then, of course, you remember the song, If You Turn Me Down Once More, I'll Join the French Foreign Legion. It was a way for men with broken hearts to escape. But if that's the case, and maybe Frenchie will tell us a little bit about the French Foreign Legion, then apparently what Berg is talking about here is creating a medical Foreign Legion. So if you have made errors in the mainland, come here and we will not publish those. We will not hold that against you. We have advised the Speaker of the detrimental effects that will have on this community in terms of our ability to recruit physicians, Berg said. I think there's a responsibility for us as a board for us to forewarn applicants about what happens here in Guam. Ooh. One of the greatest parts of this community in particular is that we are a forgiving community. People are allowed to make errors. They turn their life around and they're welcome back. You make a mistake, if you pay your debts to society and make something good of yourself, you should not have a scarlet letter burned on you, Berg said.
I'm having trouble because I don't know the context of what he's talking about.
He's talking about the complaints that the doctors are licensing people from off-island who have had records of misconduct in other places.
Like malpractice, or like that other doctor recently who has sexual misconduct on his record?
Well, whatever. You know, let's just put it this way, derogatory records, right? Suits, criminal complaints, whatever.
I just wrote a comment. That did not bode well for the Archdiocese.
No, it did not. It was not a good plan.
Should learn a little bit of recent history.
Yeah. But Berg says you make a mistake, you make mistakes. If you can pay your debts to society and make something good of yourself, you should not have a scarlet letter burned on you. Now, I think he's talking about just Guam in general, not doctors in particular. I don't think that Speaker Therese Tetlahi is advocating a situation where you'd see doctors with a red M burned into their foreheads. Yeah. During the oversight hearing last month, Tetlahi pushed for the board to update its website and make information about complaints against doctors who practice in the community available in order to allow patients to make an educated decision when selecting a health care provider. At the time, the website only had 50 of 600 practicing physicians profiled uploaded to the website with information pertaining to medical license status. 50 of 600. Quote, Speaker Tetlahi is acting very dictatorial, coming to our meetings and saying, you better do it, without thinking that we have expressed concern that it could be detrimental. Berg said, boy, that's Speaker Tetlahi, huh?
She should be governor.
She's acting in a dictatorial fashion. You're getting into typecasting here now, Jose.
She's female.
I don't know if we can say that. Does that violate an FCC reg?
They're female.
That's better. Recent allegations of sexual misconduct against 2 doctors practicing on island led Tetlahi calling the oversight hearing. According to Rob Weinberg, the board's legal counsel, any local doctor with a felony conviction on their record, as well as misdemeanor convictions related to medical practice, would also need to be disclosed on the website. He conducted a review of complaints filed against doctors starting with last names beginning in A. It sounds like voting at the legislature. I wonder how many of the doctors passed. Just the A's of applicants and current licenses. We did it on a case-by-case analysis of, does this go on the page or not? There's actually criteria. To put settlements on there, it has to be within the last 5 years. There has to be 4 or more, and they have to be 30,000 or more, Weinberg said. So if a doctor was sued for medical malpractice, and he, instead of going to trial, he was able to settle with the plaintiff, in order for that settlement to be put on the Medical Board of Examiners website, it would had to have been one of 5 settlements, each of which was worth more than 30 grand. All right, let's break for the big halftime show, and maybe we can get to the B's on the list.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
A strike in Kiev. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. The source of that big explosion reported earlier in the Ukrainian capital city has been identified.
A Russian missile or airstrike hitting. The target appears to have been a residential building. We are also told closer to the city center of Kyiv, and that, of course, would be of dramatic significance if the missiles are beginning to rain down on Kyiv city center, which we have not at this point seen widely targeted by the Russians.
Fox's Jonathan Hunt in Lviv. The two sides are scheduled to resume ceasefire talks this morning. Fox News correspondent Benjamin Hall wounded just outside Kiev covering the invasion. He's hospitalized, but we have few other details. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan meeting with China's diplomats in Rome Monday, warning them not to support the Russian invasion.
What we have conveyed and what was conveyed by our National Security Advisor in this meeting is that should they provide military or other assistance that, of course, violates sanctions or supports the war effort, that there will be significant consequences.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, the leader of the United Nations, worried that if the Russian conflict escalates, it could go nuclear.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told reporters Vladimir Putin's decision early in the invasion to place his nuclear forces on high alert was a, quote, bone-chilling development, and that nuclear war cannot entirely be ruled out.
It's time to stop the horror unleashed on the people of Ukraine and get on the path of diplomacy and peace.
And Guterres went on to call for the safeguarding of Ukrainian nuclear facilities and announced the UN is donating $40 million to assist Ukrainians. Meanwhile, Estonia became the first NATO country to officially call for a no-fly zone over Ukraine.
Fox's Bill Malushin, American, is listening to Fox News.
We're already Pika's best radio station, but we're always looking for ways to be even better. Announcing the point on Alexa. In addition to our FM and HD radio feeds, our incredible app, informative website, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live, you can now tell Alexa to stream The Point. And your smart speaker will start playing whatever we're saying. News and views 24/7 with your 4-word command. Alexa, stream The Point.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
A homeowner's policy protects much more than just your house. It also protects you against claims from someone being hurt on your property. If a visitor is injured at your place, how much are you covered for? The smart thing to do is get the answer today.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
A hearing has begun in federal bankruptcy court to determine if the Boy Scouts reorganization plan is acceptable.
Several issues surrounding the proposed settlement will be brought out in federal bankruptcy court. It will include liability claims, insurance rights, and exactly what led to more than 80,000 sex abuse allegations. 2 years ago, the Boy Scouts of America filed for bankruptcy protection. Its reorganization plan calls for nearly $800 million from the national office and local councils to go into a compensation fund of more than $2.6 billion. In exchange, the Scouts and some insurers would be released from liability. The plan faces opposition from those hoping to protect due process rights. The trial itself is expected to last several weeks. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
A judge in Florida has agreed to make permanent an order that prohibits the release of photos, videos, or other records related to the death of comedian Bob Saget. His widow, Kelly Rizzo, and their 3 daughters requested that order. Saget was found dead January 9th in an Orlando hotel room the morning after a performance, the medical examiner ruling he likely died of accidental head trauma. The founder of WikiLeaks has lost another bid to avoid being extradited to the U.S.
Britain's Supreme Court says it has rejected a request from Julian Assange after he asked for permission to appeal a decision to extradite him to the US. The founder of WikiLeaks is wanted over his website's work publishing secret American files. The court says it refused Assange's application because it, quote, did not raise an arguable point of law. It's now up to the British government to finalise the extradition, although Assange can still pursue another challenge. In London, Simon Owen, Fox News.
You think of rock and roll, you think of Dolly Parton, right? She didn't think so either, so she's asked that her name be removed from this year's ballot for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Half a day. This is Jade Ugin from Security Title, and in celebration of Tomorrow Month, here is a tip on dealing with your land. You might be thinking of giving part of your property to your child or another family member. Once you have subdivided the property and recorded the map, you will also need to record the deed transferring the title. Just drawing the map is not enough to make sure they actually own the land. Protehi I Tanonmu. When it comes to your family land, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Back at it again with the Lenten season menu with Mezcla, giving you a variety of food you can enjoy and pick from, like the fish tacos, spicy buttered shrimp, parrotfish escabeche, lobster pad capral pasta, crab crusted Chilean sea bass, and more. There you have options. Offered at Hagåtña location for lunch and dinner only at Mezcla. For reservations, call 671-479-2652. What are you waiting for? Let's go celebrate the Lenten season with Mezcla.
So here we go, another big halftime show on Tall Tales. It doesn't get any better than that. It means we're in the second half of Tall Tales now, and I'm still working on that item on the card titled Berg versus Transparency, where Dr. Nathaniel Berg, who is the chairman of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, is talking about, or is engaged in discussions involving what about a doctor's past should be disclosed on the medical on the board's website. And Berg takes a rather restrictive approach. He's complaining a little bit about Senator, as you were Speaker Therese Tlaib. He's saying she's a bully, etc. It's kind of interesting. And we're picking up now with Berg in a remark about something that happened. And Berg said that Tlaib was made aware of the case-by-case nature of updating physician profiles prior to the board meeting. But he noted that there are a few high-profile matters that need to be reviewed and may be reconsidered. For Berg, it doesn't make sense to include information that is decades old. But according to Weinberg, doctors with disparaging history can also get in a word on the website, Weinberg's counsel to the board. It is also authorized that they can post their own exculpatory statement if they want to as well, Weinberg said. Berg's concern weighed heavily on the possibility of disclosed information about doctors resulting in recruitment challenges. Now, during the halftime show there, I did take a peek at Facebook, and I'm a little bit angry because one of the posters there said something about doctors not wanting the disclosure because they've got skeletons in the closet. That is exactly the kind of line that I should be using here on Tall Tales. Somebody beat me to the punch. Envy's a horrible thing, Jose. Nice going. All right, that's our audience, thinking all the time. International radio listening audience.
A true tailgater.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it goes on, quote from Berg, we need to let people know if they're applying that if they get approved for emergency, temporary, or permanent, we are obligated to ask about any convictions they may have had 20 to 30 years ago, Berg said. Well, yeah, okay. For lawyers, it's no 20 or 30 years, it's your whole life. Quote, yes, we are obligated to ask, Weinberg responded. The people have spoken through legislation, through legislators, and have said, we want to know. I don't believe there's any balancing between what they did 5 years ago. If it's egregious enough, and we're not talking about DUI or something like that, we're talking about some of these high-profile cases. Weinberg says, sorry, Nate, it's the law. Berg continued to push against posting of doctors' histories, noting that some of them have practiced for decades and that it's not required in other jurisdictions. But Weinberg provided some context behind why the policy enacted locally. Quote, that may be, but no other jurisdiction already had the reputation of being some easy place to come in and get access to a license. That wasn't true before, Weinberg said. Although the conversation could have continued, Dr. Annette David, Guam Board of Medical Examiners member, shifted the focus toward transparency and accountability. Quote, if you are the physician who is applying here, you would be open to being honest about your record, David said. What I'm saying is that if you did that, no matter how long ago, you should own it. You should be willing to open up about it to the public, and we'll let the public decide if they trust you. Wow. She contended that of the 50 states, 40 disclosed full histories of doctors to the public. This is not about us being the outlier. I think the issue is what are the criteria for what is posted, and that is certainly something we can all discuss and come to a consensus with senators, David said. David was in support of having the public database for island residents, which he said is critical to transparency and accountability. I guess David has never heard of the phrase, "it's a personnel matter." Maybe we should introduce her, take her down to the port and introduce her to Rory. The entire concept of having an easily accessible public database that will allow the public to make an informed choice of which physician they will entrust with their care is a good one. And I know you will agree with me, David said. She also encouraged the board to look at the oversight hearing with senators under a different light. Quote, that we are not in a contentious relationship with Senator Tlahi and the senators, but in fact, they requested this because they wanted to know how to assist the board to be more effective, David said. 2 local doctors who have sexual misconduct complaints filed against them, Dr. Abner Pasatiempo and Dr. Ugo Chukwu Akama, were among the 50 doctors listed. Pasatiempo's license is listed as expired, while Acoma's license is active. There's no indication of any past or current complaints against them. 2 patients have come forward with separate allegations of sexual assault and harassment against Acoma, a private practitioner and owner of Hepzibah Family Medicine. Both have filed formal complaints with the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. One victim filed a report with the board in 2020. The second alleged victim filed in 2021. The board, however, did not provide the person who filed the complaint in 2020 with any updates on its investigation this year. The victim told the Post she received a letter on February 15 notifying her the investigation was complete and there was insufficient evidence or legal basis to warrant a finding that a violation of the Physicians Practice Act occurred. It took 2 years to find out the information, despite repeated calls to the board since her filing the complaint, she said. 2 years to find out, no case. In January, when the allegations against Acoma surfaced publicly, Berg did not respond to questions about how the investigation stood. Still, or why the complainants did not receive timely updates. Guam Board of Medical Examiners did not respond to questions about protocols in place for doctors facing allegations of sexual assault. Well, here we see a newspaper reporter who actually kind of dug into this story. I hope he doesn't get in too much trouble for that. Okay. Next story here. I'm going to be on my guard and try not to be repetitious. The title of the next item on the card is Pete versus E. Mandakuncia. And the title, it's a story that ran in the Post. No endorsement. New political group. Others begin fundraising. Attorney Peter John Santos, a name that is really familiar to us. Attorney Peter John Santos, better known as Repeat, said Friday he's no longer seeking to run for the office of delegate. Boy, that didn't last long, did it? But is instead focusing on a new political action group that he and about a dozen others have created called the, quote, Responsible Guam Political Action Committee. Now, what Repeat is doing here is he's elbowing Michael San Nicolas in the ribs, because the name of Michael San Nicolas's campaign the last time was Responsible Guam. So it's kind of like Repeat is saying, you want a responsible Guam, Michael? I'll show you a responsible Guam. And then there's a quote, we're going to be publishing fact-check information that candidates for elected office have been putting out there, Santos told the Post. There will be no endorsement of candidates because we are a nonpartisan and independent political action committee. This is the second political action group to file its organizational report with the Election Commission for the 2022 primary and general. The first one was Action PAC, Inc., which continues its focus on rolling back the business privilege tax, right-sizing the government, among other things. In the 2020 elections, Action PAC endorsed 12 senatorial candidates, also supported a leaner government and a tax rollback. These two political action groups are among the 11 teams that have so far filed organizational reports, which means they can start raising and spending funds in excess of $250. Skipping on down to get to San Nicolas. Delegate Michael San Nicolas has long been saying he's considering a gubernatorial run, but has not announced his final decision. Santos, chairman of the Responsible Guam Political Action Committee, cited examples of San Nicolas and Senator James Moylan as elected officials who, he said, have been known for sending numerous press releases and statements that need fact-checking for the benefit of the voters. Quote, our focus is not limited to incumbents, but everyone who's seeking a political seat. Voters need to know that the information coming out from these candidates or potential candidates are true, honest, and unbiased. From political candidates? Wow. How about... you know, when you go into a used car lot to buy a used car, you know, there's a technique that salesmen use that's called puffing. Yeah, and it doesn't mean blowing yourself up, you know, like, what's the name of those fish? Yeah.
Pufferfish.
The pufferfish. No, it doesn't mean. What it means is you kind of mildly exaggerate the quality of a car that you're trying to interest the customer in. Something like, yeah, this car is a beauty. Look at her here, man. Only 105,000 miles on it. And I'm not sure, but I was told it was driven by a little old school teacher who never drove any faster than 20 miles an hour. This looks like a real peach for you. You know, look at here. Gosh, the rubber alone is worth $400. That's puffing in the used car trade. Do politicians engage in puffing?
That's a hard question.
Yeah, well, the answer to that used to be, is the Pope Catholic? But that's a poor answer anymore. Now we are remanded to the defecation habits of the bear.
There's a different strain in questioning in your voice when you ask that question. Is the Pope Catholic?
Yeah. Yeah, it's no longer a rhetorical question. Yeah. So, let's see. So far, we've seen some who dance around the truth. Are we back to Señor Tatlai again?
Maybe it's cultural.
Yeah, maybe. Santos said it's like the show Mythbusters, where they try to check common myths or knowledge if they're in fact true. That's what we intend to do. This early, he said, there have already been people giving unsolicited donations to the Responsible Guam Political Action Committee. Santos also recently wrote to the Office of Congressional Ethics, alleging paid advertisements taken out by San Nicolas' office were illegal. San Nicolas' team filed an organizational report with GEC, but it's for his re-election as delegate, while Moylan's team also filed an organizational report for his re-election as senator. However, nothing prohibits them from running for another office. Okay, the rest of the article is about who else is running, but this is quite an undertaking here, repeat, to fact check all of the statements that even just senatorial candidates make. You know, voters need to know that the information coming out of these candidates or potential candidates are true, honest, and unbiased. I don't know if that's ever happened before. Okay, well, anyhow, we wish him luck. Anything that's good for talk radio can't be all bad. Next article, Senator, is called Rules Committee versus ? And it's titled Senators Call for End of Public Health Emergency. A group of senators are calling for an end to the public health emergency initially executed in March 2020. Senator Chris Duenas, along with sponsors Moylan, Adda, Bloss, Brown, and Taitigui, introduced a resolution that would end the public health emergency declared by the governor, according to a press release. The Republican senators note that if the governor does lift the emergency declaration and something else occurs, another declaration can be issued. The senators also pointed to the governor's easing of restrictions associated with the pandemic in light of the manageable Wuhan virus hospitalizations, along with the availability of vaccinations and treatment. They added the governor's comment last week, "We are starting to turn the COVID corner," which they say further evidences the need to end this emergency declaration. Now, I'm going to channel my true Tello Taitigui here for this next paragraph. Thank you to former Senator Bob Klitzkie for providing the initial framework for this resolution, and Guam Freedom Coalition for acquiring the support to get this introduced. I also like to thank all of the co-sponsors and pray for the rest of our colleagues in the 36 to support this public health emergency. So, you know, if I were Tello, I would be angry. They didn't ask me if they could use my name in this press release. Yeah. Or Mary Torres. Now, what Chris is alluding to, of course, is the famous, or is it infamous, Bob and Ray resolution. That Ray had the idea, why don't we draft this? Or Ray said, you know, is there any way the legislature can end the emergency? And there's a statute that said, yeah, 8 members of the legislature can do it. So Ray said, how about drafting up a resolution that accomplishes that? I did it. And I put the names of 5 Republicans on it, including Tello and Mary Torres, sent it over. They were angry.
How dare you?
Yeah, because I didn't ask them for permission to put their names on that piece of paper. I think that my thought process was that they would pick this up as though it were made of gold. They rather than doing that, they kind of left it laying around on the ground, you know, like things you find on the ground in these areas that says pick up after your dog.
It did not open till March 15th.
Yeah. And Ray and I talked about it on the radio a lot. When Chris couldn't get enough votes, couldn't get 10 votes to override his veto on Bill 11, we conducted a little arithmetic class. 8 is less than 11. You had 9 that went for the override. Yeah, that's more than 8. But nothing happened. So, so this kind of dragged on, and and the governor kept extending the emergency. And I suspect that maybe this finally, you know, calls her bluff. Maybe not, but anyhow, the bill, except for being talked about on talk radio, never went anywhere. The interesting thing here is that I have the bill, and I'm not going to tell you about the whole bill. I'm just going to go to the part And I've got, at the appropriate time, I'll get my disclaimer in here. And going back to this, using your permission, you know, when you submit something to a public body, that is the permission. And rather than to say, and rather than pull a tello, I would say, yeah, that's me. I did it. I ghostwrite for senators all the time. If there's something that needs to be done and I want to do it, and I think it's a good idea, I'll put pen to paper just like this one. Tello and Mary, you know, if they knew what they were doing, instead of saying, they didn't have permission to use my name, would have said, it's good that senators are so in tune with what's going on that they're submitting proposed legislation to us. I'll take a look. And one time we had Tello on the show, Ray and I, and Tello.
It was the day before she put out the I didn't authorize this.
And, you know, in politics, timing is everything.
Right?
Yeah, so Ray and I had a threesome on Ray's show. Ray and I, yeah. Well, not really. The three of us were all talking, and we spent about a half an hour explaining to Tello what the statute said, and that a resolution passed by 8 members of the legislature would end it. And she said, well, you know, the governor wouldn't sign it. Tello, the governor doesn't sign resolutions. This is strictly a legislative undertaking.
We learned a new term that day, too. Learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness. Oh, we couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because I couldn't get enough senators to go along with it. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I think that's the only thing I was able to teach Tello that day. I wasn't able to teach her anything about the law, the legislature, or resolutions, but I think I did teach her the meaning of the word learned helplessness, which fit her like a glove. So that's where we are. Well,
like a designer purse.
Yeah, what's in Tello's purse? So I have the bill in front of me right now, and without going through the statement of legislative findings and all that stuff, I'll get right down to the guts of what's going on here. And there's a whereas clause that says 10 GCA section 19405C, which reads, the legislature, by a majority vote, may terminate the declaration of a state of public health emergency at any time from the date of the original declaration upon finding that the occurrence, et cetera, is over. Such termination by the legislature shall override any renewal by the governor. So that's what the law says. Okay, we'll head for Wrigley Field, and I'll get back to this and tell you the punchline of this story.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point. Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Attention, tailgaters. It's time for you to get a new tail to gate on. It's a fact. They got a 2021 model clearance going on all kinds of your favorite Nissan models, the Rogue Sport, Kicks, Murano, Titan, and they've all got great FM radios so that you can pick up tall tales in the afternoon. 0% APR, or your first 3 payments are on Nissan. Zero down Magic tailgaters. Learn more by visiting NissanGuam.com.
Okay, here we are. Churchill Downs, as you were, Wrigley Field. We aren't at Churchill Downs yet. We're still playing baseball. We haven't even gotten to the races yet. 7th inning stretch, Wrigley Field in Chicago. That means I only got 2 more innings at Tall Tales today. So I'm going to go straight into the resolution that the 5 Republicans introduced in the legislature, calling your attention again to the first few words of 10 GCA Section 19405C. The Guam legislature, by a majority vote, may terminate the declaration of a public health emergency. Majority vote. Guam legislature. Okay, then I turn the page to the resolved section of the bill, and this is what it says. Resolved that the Committee on Rules of the legislature does hereby, on behalf of the people of Guam, terminate the public health emergency begun by Executive Orders 2020-3 et sec. The Committee on Rules. Let me go back. The legislature, by a majority vote. So this is the Committee on Rules.
Wait, who's in charge? Who's the chair? The vice speaker?
Yeah. Senator Tina Rose Munga Barnes. But a resolution by the Committee on Rules is 0. You might as well get a resolution from the Mayor's Advisory Council in Tatua. It has as much effect. Because the statute says the Guam legislature by a majority vote. That's not the Rules Committee. So, you know, I will confess that I did send the Bob and Ray resolution over to Chris Duenas. And I compared the Bob and Ray with the one that they passed, and te parejo dos, ne? Ay, te parejo dos. I don't know where the idea of that the Rules Committee would have the ability to terminate the emergency came from. I will only say this. It didn't come from me. Yeah. So we'll watch this and see where it goes. But even the fact that this was introduced, I think will have some effect on the governor. Had it been introduced a couple years ago, well, not a couple years ago, but a year ago, the mere fact that one senator signed it and introduced it would have sent a pretty strong shot across the bow of the governor. Well, there we are. Next item on the card is Yoon Suk Yeol versus Ho S. Yoon. Ho S. Yoon, of course, is the owner of the Guam Daily Post. And Ho S. Yoon is the last was the last thing that appeared in the editorial page of the Guam Daily Post that looked like an editorial from the Post. It was his letter to the editor, denominated as such after a long drought and no editorials at all. And when I read his letter on the air, I said, this is really something that favors the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, what most folks refer to as North Korea. And it was a classic can't we all get along type letter to the editor, you know, that stating some things that no one would argue with, that the world would be better off if the Korean War were over and all the Koreans were living at peace, et cetera, and that kind of language. But the hard truth of the matter is that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is not going to do that. They'll never do it. They've never wanted to do it, and the only way that they would see all of the Koreans living under the flag of Korea would be with that one with the star in the middle and the 2 blue bars, the flag of the DPRK. And I went into a pretty good explanation of my trip to North Korea, and the attitude of North Korea is that if it weren't for the Kim dynasty, the United States would swallow up North Korea in a heartbeat. The North Koreans and the running dogs of their South Korean running dogs. Yeah, and the currently Kim Jong-un started out with Kim Il-sung, who is a mythical figure in Korea. He is a little factoid. Kim Il-sung is the only chief of state in the world that is dead. He is still shown as the chief of state of the DPRK. So the Kims have only one objective in mind, keeping the Kim dynasty in power. In order to do that, it's constant warmongering and saber-rattling, because the people in North Korea have been gaslighted into thinking that if they aren't prepared for war every minute, that they'll be overrun by America and Korea will disappear. So they'll put up with all kinds of hardships to fund the rockets and nuclear research and the other things that the DPRK engages in, because that's what they've been brainwashed into. So for anybody in the South Korean side to say, you know, we really ought to make peace with the North. I don't know if there is a way that I could monitor North Korean newspapers, but I suspect that would be headlines in the North Korean papers. South admits error in the past, right? So that was the tenor of Yoon's letter, was to favor a rapprochement with the North Koreans. And there was a presidential election going on at about the same time, and the current premier of Korea, president-elect of Korea, subscribes to that theory. We've got to work harder to get along with the North Koreans. We've got to build bridges, etc. His name was Moon. He was term limited, and his successor was Lee Jae-myung. We just call him Lee for short. And the challenger was Yoon Suk-yeol. And Yoon is a hardliner. He is a not can't we all get along type of guy. And the headline of this of this article in the Stars and Stripes by a guy named David Choi, which I understand is pronounced Shea. It's probably a Korean name. The title of the article is "South Korea's Next President is Welcome News for U.S. Foreign Policy, Experts Say." So if you put all these pieces together, it's starting to make sense. The only piece that I haven't been able to put together is that there might be some connection with Ho's leanings as far as Korean policy is concerned, with the vacant space on the editorial page. The Post is running nothing but wire service stuff from the WAPO, which they mislabel as editorial comment. Yeah. And then the other possibility that I alluded to is that Ho has a application in for $50 million worth of tax credits at GITA. So the way to not have editorials to criticize the governor of Guam, who is the one who must sign these applications if they are approved by GITA, the way to not have negative editorials about the governor of Guam is to not have any editorials. But you could still use the editorial page for your dovish letter to the editor about Korean politics. So the United States liked it because as a conservative people power candidate, Yoon voiced strong support for closer U.S. ties and a tougher stance against neighboring North Korea. The president-elect said in a statement Thursday he will, quote, deal sternly with North Korea's unlawful and irrational behavior by principle, but at the same time open the door of inter-Korean dialogue anytime. We will build the South Korea-U.S. alliance and boost the comprehensive strategic alliance, sharing liberal democracy, a market economy, and the key value of human rights, he said. For Kim Jong-un, this would be like listening to 20 people running their fingernails over a blackboard. So that's why that item's on the card. Next item on the card here, maybe, and once again, we may have to call Robert Underwood in here for consultation because he's been teaching critical racism, as you were, critical race theory. Oh, wait a minute, maybe I got it right the first time.
I think so.
Since 1952. A Kansas public school teacher is suing school officials for requiring her to address students by their preferred names and pronouns. A public school teacher in Kansas is suing the principal of her school, the district superintendent, and members of the school board after being suspended for not using a student's preferred name. Pamela Ricard taught math at Fort Riley Middle School. She said she refused to use the preferred pronouns, names and pronouns of transgender and non-binary students because it violates her religious beliefs. What a horrible thing to say. After being disciplined multiple times for refusing to refer to students by their preferred names, Ricard filed a lawsuit against the Geary County Schools Unified School District. In the lawsuit, Ricard argues that school administrators preventing her from ignoring students' preferred names and pronouns deprived her of due process and equal protection of the law and violated her First Amendment rights to free speech. Her lawsuit maintains that her decision to ignore students' preferred names and pronouns does not harm her students, but several LGBTQ sympathetic organizations throughout the country disagree with this. Melanie Willingham Jaggers, the executive director of GLSEN, a national organization that emphasizes the LGBTQ plus agenda throughout the country's K through 12 schools, says that misgendering a child can have a serious impact on, now listen to this, can have a serious impact on his or her confidence and mental health. What is she doing using pronouns like his or her? Doesn't she know how to say they? Ricard's lawsuit, after the first time she ignored a student's preferred name, the principal sent an email addressing all the school's teachers that said, when we have a student that requests to go by a preferred name that is different than their given name, our district honors that request. Once you are aware of a preferred name, use that name for the student. Ricard also received reminders to use the student's preferred name and pronouns after referring to a biologically female student as Miss and the student's last name. So I think you get the drift of what this article is about. The art of pretending has now become extremely important in the marketplace. You must pretend all of this stuff, just like when we begged back to Senor Talahi, right? So when we were kids, our parents thought it was amusing that we pretended. In fact, there used to be a program on the radio called Let's Pretend. A lady, it even aired on KUAM on this island a long time ago. So, kids would pretend that their bicycles was a jet plane and that underneath the bed was their fort and, that they had three friends from a different, on and on and on. That's what kids did, right? And we never came down on them. That's the way kids are. As they grow older, they pretend less and less until they get to be adults, and they don't even freak out when they find out. Spoiler alert: take the kids out of the room. They don't even freak out when they find out there is no Santa Claus. I'm polishing up my Bah Humbug trophy right now. Yeah. So that's the way it was. But that was then, and this is now. Now you have to pretend all kinds of stuff. You have to pretend that you could learn tomorrow with a kinesthetic approach. You have to pretend that if someone is born with male plumbing and he really wants to, he can become a female. You have to pretend that two men or two women can enter into a marriage, as we understand that term. And on and on and on and on. All of this pretending. And if you can't pretend, you could lose your job. You can get canceled. All kinds of horrible things can happen to you. So maybe when we were children, we had it right. If we could have just hung on to it for the rest of our lives, we wouldn't have to learn all this new stuff. So when you're in a situation, and you know, we used to have these tests in school called true or false. So if a statement was true, you'd put a true beside it on the paper. If it was false, you put it. I guess you can't give that kind of test anymore. I think now it would have to be P or false, pretend or false, because we don't care what's true anymore. We don't care what color the rice really is. We think it's red, and that's the end of the story. All right, let's head for Churchill Downs and pretend that they're having dog races there.
Pica's best radio station, but we're always looking for ways to be even better. Announcing the point on Alexa. In addition to our FM and HD radio feeds, our incredible app, informative website, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live, you can now tell Alexa to stream The Point. And your smart speaker will start playing whatever we're saying. News and views 24/7 with your 4-word command. Alexa, stream The Point. Back at it again with the Lenten season menu with Mezcla, giving you a variety of food you can enjoy and pick from, like the fish tacos, spicy buttered shrimp, parrotfish escabeche, lobster pad capral pasta, crab-crusted Chilean sea bass, and more. There you have options. Offered at Hagåtña location for lunch and dinner only at Mezcla. For reservations, call 671-479-2652. What are you waiting for? Let's go celebrate the Lenten season with Mezcla.
I'm going to come back to Japan versus capitalism tomorrow. I'm going to skip to Waukesha versus Minneapolis today because I only got 10 minutes before I have to get out my trusty sign here. Let's keep it handy. I'm quick on the draw with Let's Go, Brandon. And the title of this article that ran in the Kenosha Times is Judge Sets October Trial in Waukesha Parade Deaths, Orders Survey to Gauge if Impartial Jury is Possible. Some background. A couple months ago, a person of color, now this is pretty important here, there was a Christmas parade down the main street of Waukesha, and this person of color got in his car and drove right into the parade, killed how many people, Jose? About 9 people?
I think a little more than that. But
injured 30, killed some children. I mean, it was just a horrible thing, right? And, of course, he had posted some things on his Facebook page that kind of gave an idea as to what his motivation was.
Kind of premeditated.
Yeah. So, once again, we need Robert Underwood would probably put the right gloss on us since he's been teaching critical race theory since 1972. So, in Waukesha, this is what they're doing. The county judge, Jennifer Darrow, scheduled a trial to begin on October 3 and run through October 28. Let's see. Darrow ordered both sides to begin drafting a survey to mail to prospective jurors in Waukesha County to gauge whether an impartial jury can be selected in the county. The judge made the move after one of the attorneys filed a motion last month seeking to move the trial out of Waukesha County or pull jurors from another county because publicity about Brooks has been so pervasive and negative. That's the alleged killer's name, Brooks. Brooks' attorney noted in the motion that the community has adopted a, quote, Waukesha Strong slogan. People built a temporary memorial to the dead, and media outlets have used photos of Brooks in court in chains because he was in court in chains. They also pointed out that First Lady Jill Biden visited Waukesha, and her remarks calling the parade crash a tragedy were widely reported. On social media, people have called for Brooks to be put to death, they added. Okay, so the judge did what you would expect a judge to do. Obviously, emotions run extremely high in Waukesha. And, I suspect that an awful lot of the people in Waukesha are not going to be objective. Would it be easy if it were your hometown and this happened? So the judge, I think, is well within her discretion to consider the possibility of changing the venue. Instead of trying it in Waukesha, maybe they should try it in Superior or Hurley or some other godforsaken place. And in order to make that decision, she's directed the council to circulate these surveys to see what the climate in the community is. I'd say that's a very responsible approach for the judge's handling of what is a rather inflammatory case. Contrast that with the way the judge in Minneapolis handled the trial that was part of the hagiography of George Floyd. I don't see how anyone could make an argument that those cops could get anything close to a fair trial in Minneapolis when the city settled on the eve of the trial for several $1 million with Floyd's family. When Auntie Max made a special trip to Minneapolis saying, we got to make sure the right thing happens here. With all the stuff in the streets and the whole Black Lives Matter, the rioting, the whole thing, it would just seem almost impossible to get a fair trial in Minneapolis on that, but the judge let it go forward. And what do you know? Guilty verdict. Now, I've analyzed the evidence in that case as reported by the media, and I think there's a very strong argument that the jury, on the facts presented, could have brought in a not guilty verdict. In Minneapolis, not a chance, because of among other things, I think in the back of the jurors' minds was the thought that anything other than a guilty of second-degree murder would mean that much of Minneapolis would burn down. So once again, Wisconsin shows its superiority to Minnesota. If anybody ever had any doubts about it, they do it right in Wisconsin. Minnesota, not so much. Okay, we got a caller here who wants to make his mark about Waukesha. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, come on. So, I would, if this was a few weeks ago, I would have said maybe they could have moved it to Chicago and he would have been found not guilty. But, Jesse got a guilty verdict. So, yeah, Chicago is not a good place for persons of color.
Well, Chicago,
when they're guilty.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to have even some kind of a plausible argument that Jesse, I understand what you're saying, but not a really good example. I can't imagine any place that wouldn't find him guilty.
Yeah, I mean, especially when your co-conspirators testified against you.
Yeah, well, but of course, once you memorize the vocabulary, white supremacists, white supremacy, systemic racism, it's all the same thing, right, Mark?
It's all Trump's fault. Yep. Yes. Okay.
Good observation, Mark.
All right. Okay, Uncle Bob. Take care.
He made his mark again today. So what have I got? Just a couple seconds here before 1 minute before the end of the show. Let me see who's on Facebook here today. We got couple new comments here. Sherry Ariarte's here, and Richard V. Leone has a long one about a website, or is it the Guam Public NOPTES further effort by J.C. Jansen to spread unverified website, and there are two names. Jansen really has to sharpen his dull campaign spear. Truth, he said, said these unnamed persons can and will be used by the opposition party. Their contributions can be covered up, buried, ignored, slept on as usual. The Guam public of a measly 160,000 second-class Americans continues to be brainwashed as their so-called island patriots. J.C. Jansen seems to be a hired political gun. Well, if it's a gun, it's just a 22.
Pea shooter.
Yeah. Yeah, never bring a BB gun to a political fight, right? For Governor Lude, a Leon Guerrero and her Pari connections and familiar name Politrix handbooks. Think about it. Guam, we have been taught to be wimpy noodles. And again, it's noted that J.C. Jansen is a PR screech leading what non-government group? Jansen claims his political concern but never speaks out about other Guam agencies' shortcomings. The Guam public notes that criminal activity grows and gets worse, yet, etc. Well, he had a letter to the editor that we kind of dissected here on Tall Tales. I would say that his letter wasn't very convincing. Gotta go, folks. It's the end of the day. It's time for me to say and show, let's go, Brandon.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Talks scheduled among continuing attacks. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Discussions between representatives from Russia and Ukraine scheduled to resume shortly as suspected Russian bombs fall on targets in central Kiev.
Loud explosions rang out in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Airstrikes again apparently hitting that city. An apartment building apparently hit once more. We understand there are casualties. We do not have confirmation at this point of how many people were killed and injured in this strike.
Fox's Jonathan Hunt in Lviv. The leaders of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia will travel to Kiev on a European mission to show support for Ukraine. President Biden will reportedly travel to Brussels next week to meet with NATO allies. Fox News State Department correspondent Benjamin Hall has been wounded, covering the attacks on the outskirts of Ukraine. Details are few, but Hall is hospitalized. The United Nations chief is warning that Russia's war on Ukraine is holding a sword of Damocles over the global economy. Secretary General Antonio Guterres says it's especially hitting poor developing countries, which are now seeing their bread baskets being bombed. Guterres says Russia and Ukraine represent more than half of the world's supply of sunflower oil and about 30% of the world's wheat. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warning China not to assist Russia in the invasion.
Less about changing their mind and more about making clear with them what the consequences would be should they take additional actions to support this invasion.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the warning to Beijing included not supplying weapons to Russia or helping them evade U.S. sanctions. Wall Street Monday, the Dow up a point. NASDAQ dropped 262. The S&P 500 down 31. Worries about possible new coronavirus cases pushing stocks sharply lower in Hong Kong and Shanghai. America is listening to